Over the last 20 years, the British economy has suffered a global recession, a vote to leave the EU, a pandemic, war in Europe, and an energy and cost of living crisis. People's finances have never been tighter. And with social media now a massive part of everyday life, the window into the lives of CEOs, bankers, and business finances has never been bigger. We're looking at the factors that affect the average person's finances and pensions. What roles do CEOs and their tweets play in stocks and shares? What conditions affect those looking to invest their money? And what more should people know when it comes to their personal finances?
Today I'm joined by Hamzah Shalchi, the MD of Headway Wealth. Welcome, Hamzah.
Thank you very much. Nice to be here.
Yeah, good to see you again. You're looking very dapper with your grey hair. So, really wanted to try and keep this kind of fun, kind of light. This is a bit of an intro, our first session for the Podcast Lounge. And what we're trying to do is really develop a stream of just 4 specific episodes that can showcase what this studio can do. But to keep it super interesting, we want to put people like you under a bit of scrutiny to explain why the world needs your services. Maybe, off the cuff, you can just tell us a little bit about your background and how you've come to become part of, or the MD of, Headway Wealth.
I left your normal education at the age of 16. I was asked to leave school before going into further education because I wasn't interested. I wasn't academic or anything like that. I went into a sales profession and then which led on to finance and insurance, which then led on to working in financial planning. I did that for about 12 years overseas in the Middle East. Ended up running one of the biggest overseas financial planning firms in the Middle East. Was involved in the growth of that. Got to 2018. We had been very, very successful. And I got to a bit of a crossroads, decided I needed to do something myself, and also just thought I could be that little bit more honest by running my own business. One area of expertise which has followed me for the last 12 years is expats.
Okay.
But that's developed into UK business owners, UK companies, UK individuals, whether they be high net worth, sports professionals, your everyday people. I've done work for family, friends, and family as well. So yeah, that's essentially where I'm at.
Quite a journey. Something interesting you mentioned there about being honest, which I think brings us onto the subject. You went into business on your own because you wanted to be a bit more honest. Now, of course, not asking you to deface any relationships or comment on things that you shouldn't. However, there's definitely a theme that people go into business for themselves so they can do more of what they believe. I wondered, what does that look like for you in Headway?
I found in a bigger organisation, and don't get me wrong, I would like my organisation to get to that size. But what I was finding in a lot of big organisations, and I spoke to a few different, competitors and stuff like that, prior to deciding to do it myself, was there's always a drive to increase their revenues, which is fine. Everybody, that's how business works, but not if it's going to come at the cost of the client. An IFA essentially is an independent financial advisor. Yeah. So a lot of the ways in which you drive more revenue is you then go and build your own fund.
Okay.
Or employ your own fund manager, or bring it in-house. And the whole point in that is, if you've got $1 billion in assets under management and you're producing £10 million a year in revenue from that billion, I'm just rounding numbers up, it gets to a stage where everyone thinks, well, how can we make more from that pool of money? And it's one of two things. One is giving up your independence, which a lot of IFAs in the UK have been accused of. And the second thing is giving up your independence or charging more.
Okay.
Every single one of them has a knock-on effect to the end user, which is the client. So by charging the client more, you should really be giving them more. But if you think about it, if you take your independence away, are you giving the client more? Or are you going to be more biased to an underperforming fund?
So it's almost, you can end up in a situation where the tail's wagging the dog
Exactly.
because you're not able to deliver the advice that you believe in.
Exactly.
Okay.
Or, fund managers go through good years and bad years. Asset classes have good years and bad years.
Yes.
If you employ your own fund manager and he has a bad year and you've got $1 billion of your assets managed by him, you can do two things. One is you can sack him, or two is you can move it to a different fund, but then you're losing revenue from that fund that he was invested in.
Yes. So it's this conflict then. What does the business do? Because it's got to grow. So it's not going to make
Exactly.
the right decision necessarily if it's only motivated by growth and money.
Exactly. However, what a lot of firms in the UK have done is acquired smaller businesses. But then that takes away, when a lot of big firms that acquire smaller businesses, they're at a size where they've got the revenue from a fund of their own.
Yeah.
They've got the revenue from that their clients are paying for financial advice, and then they've got the money to be able to go and acquire new businesses. So essentially, it's a non-independent buying an independent. So the smaller financial advice companies in the UK have massive PI cover, massive regulatory fees, and really find it hard to stay independent because of the bigger firms
Yes.
are essentially owning the marketplace and taking away independence. So there's a lot of IFAs out there that can't actually call themselves independent
Because they're having to plug into those bigger vehicles.
and the bigger vehicles are coordinating and dictating what they do with the client's assets under management.
But it's kind of a double-edged sword, isn't it? From my perspective of a noob in your sort of world, you've got, on one hand, you could say, right, well, less smaller independence means it's better, it's safer because they're all plugged in and regulated by these various regulatory bodies. On the other hand, it's a bit anti-competitive. So I suppose, what are the regulators and UK PLC doing to nurture those small businesses coming up and doing it themselves? Or actually, do you think that's not really the plan long term?
It would be easier for the regulator to have less firms to regulate.
Is that another one of those things of the tail wagging the dog?
Potentially. I mean, I just think and this could go into, the regulator does in the UK has done a great job of cleaning up financial services, a fantastic job. And I don't want to sit here as a business owner and, woe me, it's very difficult for us because of all the competition, blah, blah, blah. No, it makes it more fun that there's more competition out there. However, it is much harder for a smaller independent business to stay independent, because the minute you get to a certain size, a bigger company will come in and try and sweep you up into their network or whatever else it is. But ultimately, going back to the original question, we set up the business to be, when I say more honest, I just mean stick to what I committed to with my clients.
Yes.
And it was hard because a lot of what I committed to during the course of working for my previous firm was to fight to give them the independence, to make sure that their retirement was as smooth and as, take them from employed to retired in the most honest way, which is essentially charges being honest and being value for money, and ensuring that, we're not overcharging, which a lot of the time overseas that happens. People pay through the roof for advice overseas because when you've got a nice office in Dubai and you've got all the expense to go with it, the only way your business is going to stay afloat is by charging more money.
Yeah. Just sticking on the multiple competitors out there and the reason you went into business, so much of what we see is the personality of the founder or the CEO or the MD or whoever's leading the company, including the senior management team. They need that North Star, that sort of guiding light, as it were. And it's clear that you know yours and your cultural principles that you want to execute throughout your business and have all of your people kind of adhering to. Speaking a bit more broadly, how relevant do you think personalities are in business when it comes to, let's say, large public companies? I'm giving a bit of a nod here to Elon Musk and being a freedom of speech absolutist. Great admiration for the guy. However, when you see things happen like he'll tweet a picture of, I don't know, a particular crypto, and then that crypto goes through the roof, or say something disparaging about X/Twitter, and then the stock goes down. Do you think that's just an extension of the very reason you went into business? Because there's a bit of a dichotomy here where you're working on funds and stocks that are effectively influenced sometimes by big personalities. I just wondered, what do you say to your clients, like myself, let's say, who I'm really worried, I don't want to put money with yourselves because someone like Elon might say, Twitter's rubbish. Next thing I know, I've lost, well, my £50. But for some people, it might be a lot more.
Or your 50 million. That's a massively, massively broad question. But let's try and tick those pieces off.
Please.
In my industry, personalities, there's an abundance, all kinds. And it's very, very ego-driven.
Okay.
Massively ego-driven. And quite often, a lot of businesses make that business about themselves. And they lead it in such a way that, you've got this whole Wolf of Wall Street mentality where people are, like the leaders of these businesses are selling incentives and flash cars, and you can have this if you can make all this money and forget what the end user gets in return for their money, and bang, bang, bang.
It becomes a badge of honor in some ways.
Like it's all ego driven, and I was part of that, and probably had the biggest ego in the company to ensure that, and that's me being blunt and honest.
Yeah.
But I had to have the biggest ego in that business and be the biggest prick in that business to have the younger following follow me and make them all think that was cool. That, by me driving a flash Aston Martin and by me flying business class, that meant that I was doing the best job in the world, and you should do what I do, and blah, blah, blah. It almost sells those things. So in terms of personalities and financial services, there are some fantastic companies in the UK that you would very rarely see the owner or the managing director on even a podcast, let alone, on the TV or whatever. When it comes to somebody like Elon, his genius is what, it must be absolutely amazing to work for Elon Musk. Because that
Depending on your personality, maybe. You might not like it, right?
Exactly, but a lot of people don't like his personality. A lot of people, and you hear all the time about people overworked in that business, and employees' rights there and stuff like that, and all of these things. But you would probably hear a lot of those things from any leader.
Yes.
If it was publicized, there's this constant push for people to pull Elon Musk down. But how can you take away from his genius? You can't. If you wanted to work for a great leader, he might not be the most inspiring person when he speaks. But I mean, actions speak louder than words. Like, look at the businesses he's been involved in: PayPal, Tesla, Twitter now, and now he's got this space company, SpaceX.
Yes.
$150 billion company before it's even floated. It's phenomenal what he's done. Now, the effect that he has on his own company can only be positive.
Yes. I think you're right. There's no holding back the genius or the obvious proof of work, right, that he's done. And I mean, for God's sake, you look around, you see Teslas everywhere. So it would be ridiculous to say the guy is a liability. Okay, he could knock, I imagine, $1 trillion dollars off the world's markets and still be a positive impact. But when it comes to people who aren't thinking in those big numbers and they just want to make sure that there's somebody not doing quote unquote silly things to devalue their investments. And of
Yeah.
course, there were a lot of people invested in Twitter when he took over, and he says the things he does. So, is there any merit to them being upset that whatever their investment was is not worth as much as it is, or should they sit back and take stock in what they've actually invested in, which effectively is part of Elon as well, right? Or part Elon, because
Yeah. So if you had shares in Twitter 2 years before it sold, and you held them shares until it was sold, and Elon came along, your shares would have been bought off you at a value almost double what it was 2 years prior. Twitter went on this huge journey of being a fantastic, huge stock, having a huge drop off when Facebook and Instagram came to the market, and then it became this a great place for news feeds for people to speak in, and all the rest of it. Elon Musk comes along, buys Twitter. It's gone from being a publicly listed company to anybody can buy shares in it to being private.
yeah,
He's leveraged it. I think 20% he's leveraged. The rest of it is his. So you haven't lost any value in that.
No.
Nobody's lost any value in that unless they bought it 4 years ago. They might have got their money back. But either way. Now, if that was one of my clients that had a percentage of Twitter, or let's say Tesla today, they would literally, the exposure to one stock for an investor in a pension with an IFA, you probably wouldn't have any more than 1% exposure at its maximum of a single stock. Because what you've got to consider is, if you have a pension that invests 100% in equities, 100% in equities, that will probably have a FTSE 100 tracker, an S&P 500 tracker, a Euro Stocks tracker, NASDAQ, whatever, within that portfolio. It's all equities. In one equity fund, you're going to have an exposure of about 4 or 5% to Tesla.
Okay.
In one equity fund. If you've got 10 equity funds in your portfolio and one of them has a 6 or 7% exposure to one stock, do the maths as to how much of an exposure you actually have on what Elon does.
Interesting. So are all investments that most IFAs will, I presume if they're regulated, they would all be going down this route of distributed risk. Are you sort of suggesting that the odds of a personality making that much difference to the income of Joe Public is minimal?
Oh, absolutely. So any kind of portfolio that a client has with us, there's a number of layers and layers and layers. Some people might call bureaucracy or red tape, but it's protection essentially. Okay? So you have a portfolio with our business. Inside that portfolio, you've got hundreds of different stock that are in there. Or it might be corporate bonds, or it might be government bonds, whatever it is. But there's a layer after a layer after layer, and that's not necessarily a cost.
Okay.
That is essentially... So what you've got to think about is, let's say, for example, going back again to Tesla. If 0.2% of your whole portfolio was in Tesla, within that company, you've got a board. Within that board, you've got all the things that a board has to do as a company. If they think that the CEOs have an effect on that business, negative effect on that business, the majority of the board are going to have shares within that company as well. They can vote that CEO off. So there's layers and layers and layers of protection to take away the exposure to one nutcase or one nut job.
So really, getting back to business fundamentals, that's what protects ultimately the businesses, the stock market, the businesses in the stock market, the funds. It is that layer of accountability which makes it actually far more predictable, would you say, in terms of returns than somebody like me might consider?
It becomes far more influenced by politics, far more influenced by greater things than just one company.
Right.
So there's a lot less volatility. There's a lot less risk. Funnily enough, though, in America, and it's again, it's quite a cultural thing as well. Like, people in the UK don't like to invest in single stocks because we're not really educated on it, are we?
No, completely. I mean, the amount of people that I know that have their own portfolio that they manage on HL or any other platform, and it's minimal. Maybe for a bit of fun.
And exactly, it's a bit of fun. And they invest in a mutual fund that somebody's done a write-up of in the back of the FT. And it'll be because that fund manager is great, or the fund manager is their friend.
Personality.
One or the other. Exactly. So it's the fund manager. Now, the fund manager might hold 50 stocks within his fund.
Yes.
But that fund manager probably knows what each company CEO within that fund is having for breakfast.
Wow.
So
Does that degree of scrutiny, not necessarily the breakfast, but can we say, with some certainty that anyone running a fund generally will have a good track record and know the in and outs of each of those things they're investing in?
not necessarily a good track record, because you've got to start from somewhere. But, and again, you can't just take somebody's track record on everything. We saw that with Neil Woodford and his fund. He had a fantastic time when he was working for someone. When he had a free rein, it didn't work out quite as well for him. Now, with the UK, people invest in fund managers or funds. In America, people invest in single stocks and companies, and there's a massive difference.
On a personal level, they
On
do.
a personal level.
Really?
So Americans invest in single stocks so much more than they do in the UK, because they understand that by investing in a company in the US, for example, a company that's on the S&P 500, they're investing in something that they might use every day, like McDonald's or Coca-Cola, or let's think of something like Nike, or all these different companies. They actually can see, by investing their pension funds
Yes.
into a US company, that has a benefit not only for them and their business, but also for the US economy. And it drives money into the whole system. Whereas in the UK, it's a lot more people invest in funds.
Yeah.
Takes away a bit of volatility, but they don't understand how the stock market works. If you say the word invest to 90% of people in the UK, the one thing that comes to mind is risk.
Yes. Oh, 100%. I mean, I would suggest I'm guilty of exactly that historically. But, I think it's an ignorance that we are not taught in schools. I don't think anybody ever spoke about shares in the schools I grew up in. I certainly didn't know what pension was. I mean, until maybe 10 years ago, I didn't fully understand that a pension was nothing more than a wrapper that was, surrounding a group of things you were invested in that had a tax benefit. Effectively, the pension is the wrapper the government creates to give you a tax incentive or a benefit to invest. But
How long have you been in business?
20 years.
And halfway through that time, you realise what a pension is, and yet there's so many benefits to a business owner for having a pension.
It's nuts, but when you incorporate, when you're young and you're trying to figure it out, unless you speak to somebody in the know that you trust, and I think this is the bit of the trust and the personalities and all the rest of it. I mean, we've known each other for a long, long time, and even then, 20 years ago, I don't think I would have jumped in like that, let alone had nothing to invest. But that fear, I wonder whether that has come about in the past, because in the UK we just have a distrust in some way of stocks and shares, or a distrust of IFAs, or there's definitely an underlying distrust in the young, I would say, to believe in pensions and investments like that. And I don't know where that came from, at what point in history. I hazard a guess, and this is what I'd be grateful for your thoughts on. The first time someone spoke to me about pensions, my initial reaction was, what about this pensions crash? And the guy looked at me blankly, like, what are you talking about? I was like, I'm not really sure what I'm talking about, but I know that there were a load of teachers complaining about pensions. There was a load of news articles complaining about pensions, but I can't pretend I ever really understood.
Yeah.
So, why has that that kind of negative sentiment occurred over the last 20 years, or before the last 20?
I don't know where it came from. Again, it must be education. I speak to people, clients that are in their 60s that have a good pension pot. They started employment at the age of 18, let's say. Came out of school, went straight into employment at wherever, let's say British Airways. And they tell me that they were dragged by more senior people in their business, dragged down to the HR office and forced to sign in the pension because it was a great pension fund.
Wow.
They then got to an age where that pension fund was a great pension fund. They're in their 50s, they've got this big pot of money. They were educated by older people.
Yes.
When I turned 18, was asked by somebody, do I want to invest into a pension? Because it was choice 20 years ago. It wasn't forced on you. And I said, well, why would I need that for retirement? I wouldn't need that for retirement. Not realising, A, I would have got tax relief on the money that was going into it. And B, the benefit that it would have had for me 20 years down the line. Now I'm 20 years on from being 18. And had I have been putting money into a pension for those years, in fact, maximising what I could have put into a pension for those years, that would have been a substantial amount of money in a pension along with other investments that I've made. I wasn't educated. And it all comes down to education. Nobody knows what the benefit of it is. My stepdaughter asked me about taxes the other day. She's 16. Technically, she can go, she's working now and all the rest of it. Hasn't got a clue about what taxes are for, how much you pay, how you can reduce them, nothing like that. The system does not teach it.
Yeah, that's very interesting on the education side. And I mean, from my perspective and from my kids, I really hope that there just becomes a general culture of trying to understand the financial models. Politics, I don't have time for, but one way or the other, the financial interest and the financial instruments we invest in are dictated by government. So I think there has to be some increased level of knowledge around that. Now, I do just want to focus on where that negative sentiment comes from, though, because it's not from nowhere. It's not been invented. There must be scenarios in which you have had to tell your customers or people that you know that they might not have got what they expected. And I know this, again, anecdotally, but through people in the police that I knew, hospitals, that sort of care working thing. There must be scenarios where the pension didn't turn out like they expected, and someone has to be accountable for that. We're moving on from the personalities. It's not necessarily the CEO of the company that we're investing in, but somebody sold that pension or somebody provided that pension. So how can we make sure people get what they expect?
Two things. One, if you come to me as let's say you worked in the police for 10 years, you've got your police pension, and you came to me and said, I'd like to set up a pension. Absolutely, we can set up a personal pension alongside it, but I can't do anything with your police pension. That's a government pension. That's what we would call a local government pension scheme, or it would be a unfunded government final salary scheme, which have over the years come under scrutiny because the government has realised, well, we can't actually pull through with that promise and give you what we thought we could give you, because interest rates have been ridiculously low. So, returns on UK gilts have been very, very low, etc., etc. So a local government pension for a doctor, a nurse, civil servant, all of those things, yes, they've changed over the years. Some of them have gone from final salary schemes to averaging out the salary over the term that they work there and all of that kind of stuff. There's nothing you can do about that other than vote for somebody else. But even that,
there's no accountability around people in the public sector getting what they would hope or expect or have been loosely promised.
There's an element. You're always going to get something, and you'll always get something, but it'll never be enough.
Wow.
In your eyes, it'll never be enough. But in someone else's eyes, that might be a great pension. Some people go into the civil service because they can clock in at 9, clock off at 5, not be accountable for anything, have a pension at the end of it, and that's what they work for, to do 30, 40 years and have a pension for life, and then off they go. And,
yes. But typically what they're promised in those scenarios, that gets delivered. There's not too much volatility around that?
There's not a huge amount of volatility, but, benefits can be changed.
Right.
It's a defined benefit, but it's not defined, and government legislation will constantly change. Last year you could only put £40,000 into a personal pension. This year you could put 60. Now if it changes to a Labour government, that might be reduced to 40 again, or even less.
Right.
Taxes will always change. Benefits will always change. So with a local government pension, there's nothing you can do.
No.
With a personal pension, you would never ever be guaranteed anything by a financial advisor in terms of returns. Again, some people call it red tape. Essentially, it's protection. At the start of every single report that is written, past performance is no guarantee of future returns.
Mm-hmm.
So nobody's going to guarantee you anything now. You can't guarantee anything now with a pension. So there always has to be a risk sign, a risk. And maybe that's something that scares people about investing.
Yes.
Because of the amount of risk warnings and disclaimers and this and that, it's like if McDonald's had to have a sign on every door which was a risk warning that you could die 10 years sooner by eating nothing but McDonald's, maybe less people would eat McDonald's.
Yes.
In financial services, you have to have that. We also have to put all the charges in our reports, which is great, but then we have to also show you the effective charges. So a financial advisor's charges, here's a pension, this is what it will be worth if it grew at this value, and then there's another table above it which will say if you weren't paying for financial advice,
Yes.
it'll be worth this much more.
Right.
It's a bit like saying there's an aeroplane, you fly it to London, it'll cost you £1,000 to fly it there. Fly it with a pilot on, it'll cost you £2,000. Is that plane going to get to London if you fly it, or is it going to get there if a pilot flies it? What's going to be the safer route?
It's interesting because it feels like, from your description, that financial services companies are being expected to do a service that takes a lot of skill to manage and a lot of education and a lot of hard graft. You can't just tomorrow start selling pensions. But at the same time, perhaps add elements of devaluation around their work because they're having to constantly state everything. And, when you buy a product off the shelf, you're not asking for the certificate of origin for every single part of that product. You just want to know that this product was made here and there's probably a fair margin on it. It sounds a little bit different in financial services.
How long does a dentist generally practice for?
7 years, something like
7 years, okay. So I've practiced for longer than 7 years, but in financial services, studied for 2 or 3 years initially to get a certain level of qualification, but they study for 7 years. If you walk into a dentist and you've got toothache and he says, I need to pull that tooth out, put an implant in, it's going to cost you £3,000, what do you do?
Well, if it hurts enough, you crack on with it, don't you?
Exactly, you're going to pay it. Don't even bat an eyelid. That's what it costs for a dentist. You've got no idea what goes into that. He might say to you, I'm going to pull this tooth out, I'm going to guide you through it, blah, blah, blah. Charge what they want. Is there anybody telling them that they can't charge what they want?
No, the free markets rule in that scenario.
If you go and see a lawyer and you've got a cheap lawyer who might get you out of jail, this one's going to guarantee you don't go to jail, but he's much more expensive because he's a much better lawyer. You're going to pay for this lawyer or this lawyer.
Yes.
Depends what the sentence is, really.
But do you think that this, it might be called overregulation or overstipulation, let's say. But do you think that has come about to fix rogue elements in the industry, or is it more to do with fixing that perception of protection?
The protection is all there. I think there's more than enough protection there. I just think that because it's managing people's money, that level of protection is there. If somebody does a bad job with your tooth, you can go and see another dentist and get it sorted quite quickly. If you lose all your money in a bad investment, there is no bringing that money back unless you go out and work again. So I can see the different levels of working.
Yeah.
I can see the reason why the regulator is as strict as what the regulator is and wants you to do all of this. But there was so much mis-selling back in the day.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of people will talk to you about certain kinds of pensions that were sold and endowment policies and these things and that things where they thought they were going to, you know, essentially make a load of money. Well, essentially what was happening was that financial advisors were the ones that were making the most money, not the end customer. What should be happening is if a financial advisor is taking 1% of what you're earning, you should still be netting out a profit from investing over a 10-year period. If you're not, and if you're losing money, that's where there's a problem.
So here's an interesting question then. All of this additional governance and compliance over the last 15 years, let's say, has that added a lot more cost to, I know it's fixed a lot of things, but has it added a lot more cost to running those organisations?
Yes, because the organisations pay the regulator, the regulatory fees.
So all IFA institutes or companies, they have to pay the regulators for their services.
They pay
It's
the
not a
regulator.
public service.
No. You pay the regulator. Every directly authorised firm pays the regulator, and it's based on their turnover. The bigger you get, the more the turnover. But then at the same time, every regulated entity has to have a PI cover.
Okay.
And as regulation gets stricter and stricter and stricter, PI cover becomes more and more and more expensive. If you ever have a complaint against your business, then you have to claim on your PI sometimes maybe, and then it drives down the value of your business. And it's very, very consumer driven to help the end user.
Yes.
Maybe a bit too much, but it's the nature of the beast. I think that in the UK, you as a customer of a financial services business should be very, very comfortable, very confident if a company is independent, that you are very, very, very safe in investing in pension funds, in ISAs, general investment accounts, and by using a financial advisor. Because the levels that you've got to get to in terms of delivering the right thing for a client are set out so strict by the regulator.
Yes.
That I think the end user just needs to go and get financial advice, because you won't get that with any other industry. There is no other industry in this country that gives you the level of protection that financial services does for financial advisors. And the FCA, a lot of that is down to the FCA. But that should really, really fill people with more confidence to go and use a financial advisor. And the only way I think that it's going to make it easier for us as financial advisors is if the public is constantly reassured that financial services people are not all like what you see on the TV and the Wolf of Wall Street kind of thing. Like, the regulator has got a grip on it.
Yes. I think that is really valuable, actually. And what's the difference when someone chooses to put money with you or somebody else? Are they looking at the brass tacks? Are they looking at, oh, well, I'm going to get a projected 0.1% more using this investment rather than Headway? Or are they perceiving there's more risk with yourself than, let's say, a massive SJP type company? Because the second one is obviously not true at all, because you're both regulated by the same bodies, and you wouldn't have got to where you've got to if you weren't regulated in that way. You've jumped through all those hoops. So what is it that differentiates between one IFA and another?
Well, first of all, certain financial advisory firms can't be referred to as an IFA because they're not independent.
Interesting.
So you can look at the levels of charges, first of all, between IFA 1 and IFA 2. One might not be independent, which means he has to pay away a portion of his revenue, which might drive up the cost.
So he's just a spokesman for another company, effectively.
Potentially.
Wow.
Yeah. The person that's independent might actually be cheaper. Might be a smaller company, but remember, if you become a client of Headway's, Headway doesn't hold your money. We use the institution, some of the biggest institutions in the world, a platform, it's a custodian. It isn't Headway itself. Headway is getting a tiny, tiny portion of the pot that you've invested for the work that you're doing. Or Headway is charging you a fixed amount every single month to look after your services. What I think the general public need to move more towards, instead of thinking about their returns, first of all, is what else can this financial advisor educate me on? As a business owner, can I educate you on the benefits of getting tax relief from your pension? Yeah. As a business owner, can I give you options for what you could be doing with the cash sat in your bank account? As a business owner, could I help you if you sold your business, help you in retirement, help you drive towards retirement? And then, you're always going to have this difference of a couple of % here and there with returns. If you constantly just chase returns, you're going to miss out on the other things that by an employee making one contribution to a pension, the government immediately gives them a 20% uplift on that contribution. How many funds out there will give you 20% in a year?
I imagine none.
There will be. Some funds will
Really?
do quite well in a year, yeah.
20%.
But the chance of that, against a guarantee, if I put 20 grand extra of my savings into a pension this year, I'm going to get a 20% uplift from the government through tax relief.
I know, it's true. But that is not publicised well enough, in my opinion. Be it through the private sector, be it through the government, whatever. It's just not obvious. It's not what people are thinking about.
Does it sell? Think about this. What sells more in terms of, we've got this clickbait, right? We've constantly got things coming up on our phone.
Yes.
Pensions provide 20% tax relief. Or fund manager found sniffing off the his assistant. What are you going to click on? Which one are you going to click
Depends
on?
if it's your face on there, mate. I'll definitely click it.
But the point I'm getting at is, it doesn't, you don't know about it because it isn't at the top of the most searched thing on social media.
No.
If I talked about that on Instagram, or if your wife is sitting there talking about her latest skin hack, I don't get spots anymore because of this, right? What are people, 90% of people are going to click on that?
Yes.
And that's not me being sexist, right? That is fact. Are you going to click on 20% tax relief in pensions, or are you going to click on Ronaldo is now making £5 million a week playing in Saudi Arabia?
The irony is we're more interested in his 5 million than the extra 20% that's actually attainable to us. So what we're really suggesting, or you're suggesting, is it's not deliberate, but it's human nature to not be interested in those things that actually will make the most difference to your life potentially, rather than the exciting things to click on that are just going to give you that fix for that 2 minutes. And that's a whole other conversation. But
I think what if people focus less on investment returns, because they will always, not always. I mean, look, there's a lot of companies. A company you named before has come up under a lot of scrutiny for using their own funds. They have exit penalties, all the rest of it. You can't do that. You can't do that anymore. You can't have exit penalties in a pension. And the things that I would be asking a financial advisor if I was you would be, if you manage my pension for the next 5 years and I don't see value in it, how much is it going to cost me to leave? If the answer is 0, what have you got to lose with working with a financial advisor? And I say this to all my clients. If you don't find value in paying for our advice, if you can turn that off like a tap, the same way as if you don't watch Netflix anymore, you're going to continue paying for that?
I think that's the belief, though. That's the belief that you and any other IFA, unless you've got a personal relationship, will not be able to prove, even on with the ink on the paper, with the signature. No one out of the box is going to believe that. Oh well, everyone could promise they could switch the tap off, and I think that's something that has to come down to the the financial systems in this country, I think it comes down to the financial systems in this country to make that more obvious that you are protected. Going back just a moment when you were suggesting finance is the most protected, regulated industry in this country, probably next to medicine, let's say. But nobody really believes it. Everybody still thinks it's dodgy, it's risky, it's not for me, and I wonder whether that's a perception that's very hard to change for
Maybe it's a
your
cultural
sector.
thing. Because again, if somebody down the road came to you and said, "I want to borrow £10,000 off you," how much scrutiny are you going to go through? Or you generally, the first thing you're going to say is no. How do you know that's not Elon Musk who's going to give you a 50 times return?
Yes.
Yeah. You are only going to lend money to a handful of people in your life.
Yeah,
Yeah?
that's true. That's true.
So you're fortunate that you know an IFA and have known an IFA for 20 years. Most people either don't know one, or on the flip side of that, they don't want to talk to another man or woman about their finances if they aren't good, or if they aren't as good as what they think they would be. If it's a family friend, if it's someone that you're drinking with every week, if it's a friend of a friend.
It becomes a bit of an ego discussion or an ego
So
worry.
much ego in it.
Yeah.
So many men don't want to talk to another man, especially even in front of their wife. They don't want to talk
Yes.
to another man about their finances, sometimes in front of their wife, and the wife might be the same, because there might be an element of like shame around it.
Yes. Well, we're taught never to talk about money, aren't we, as kids? It's,
Exactly.
don't ask how much that cost. I remember being told when I was a kid, no, don't ask what that car cost or what that door cost or
Yeah.
whatever else cost. And I think maybe there's a little bit in our culture growing up that carries on to when we're actually supposed to be speaking to a professional, cards on the table. This is what I've got. This is how I need to maximize it.
It's such a difficult thing to talk about. You know, and having money troubles. There's all these things that have been talked about recently that men should talk about their mental health. And the same is with somebody coming to me and saying, "Hamzah, I'm really, really confused about my pensions. Don't know what they're going to do. I don't trust to speak to anybody else. Could you help me?" And I've had this recently from, people I know have come to me and said, pensions, retirement, this and that. I'm about to retire. Can you guide me? Of course I can.
Yeah.
Stupid question. That's what I do for a living. That's what my business does. Why do you feel so ashamed to come and say that to me? If I was selling T-shirts, you'd walk straight in the door, buy the T-shirt off me and walk away.
Maybe it's because anybody talking about money, we naturally suspect they want something. I know certainly in business, if somebody wants to work with me and they come straight away and they want to talk about money, I'm automatically put off, because I'm like, if you're looking at it solely through the lens of finances, you're missing the context of what it is we're trying to offer here. And finances are very different to that, because people in finance are looking to invest the results of your hard work. It is that banked effort that you're looking at them to they're looking at you to manage and look after. I almost think, a slight change in paradigm for me. I almost think there is it needs to be looked at in a very different way to just a business transaction when you're talking with somebody who's going to hopefully make your finances in a better state. Realistically, though, for Joe Public, they have 50 grand. They invest it on day one. What would you suggest is a sensible annual return percentage on that amount invested? Forget compound. We've all heard compound growth. We've all heard of those things. But compared to throwing in a bank, let's say it's in your normal current account, you get a couple of 3%. If you chuck it in a savings account, you might get 4 point something percent. Should they just chuck it there? Or would they be getting a better return by investing it? And what does that look like?
In a nutshell, it is, if you gave me or invested £50,000 in let's say a general investment account today, would you be happy if in 10 years' time that was worth £100,000? Is it a yes or a no? It's not a rhetorical question.
Absolutely.
You'd be happy with that?
Yeah.
Okay. I, as a financial advisor for the last 15 years, very, very rarely, in fact, never, do I get a Christmas present from a client. Do I get a call from a client to say, God, that was a good year. Thank you. Well done. This, that, and the other. Yeah. It's never, ever enough.
No.
Ever. Yeah. So some clients would be quite happy if they got their 50 grand back. You know, if somebody's putting £1,000 a month away for the next, 5 years, and you turn around and say, there's your 60 grand, they would go, well, that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. If somebody put £1,000 a month aside and it was £100,000, that's great as well. But if somebody put away £50,000 savings now and in 10 years' time is worth £100,000, to some people that would be great. To some people, that's your job. Well done. There's no thank you or well done or anything like that. It's never enough. So for every single person, the answer to that is different. There are people who are getting into their 60s who may have made 5% net returns every single year for the last 30 years from their financial advisor. It's not huge. It could have been more. But they're grateful the fact that they had a soundboard there. And that's something that I like to sell to my clients as well, is there's a soundboard. My clients ring me, they'll be fuming right now that my phone is turned off, because they can ring me and just ask me a few questions. I've got this idea. I want to do this, or, it's coming to the end of the tax year. We're going to do this and this. What do you think? It's a soundboard. They are happy with getting to retirement safely, securely, with what might to a lot of people just seem like bang average returns.
Yeah.
Yeah. But every single person is different. So the question you're asking me there is, what should somebody expect?
I think I'm saying, what is an average return? Like, interest rates are so high now in this country. Oh, they're not high, but compared to what we were used to, they're high. What has that made it more difficult?
No. That has made the job so easy. So a man with money in his bank account for years and years and years has been afraid. Let's say they've got hundreds of thousands of pounds in their bank account. They're scared. In this country, they're scared of the risk. Yeah, they're scared of the risk, and yet so many people who in their pensions have been making 8 or 10% returns, and yet the money in the bank, no, I'm not investing that. The market, it's scary. Investing is scary. They won't touch it. Interest rates being where they are, you can now get in excess of 5% per year from a fund that is essentially in cash. From gilts, you'll get, you can buy them at 95 pence, and in a year's time they'll mature at £1, and it's safer than a bank. People can now move their money out of their bank account into some element of investing, whether that be a cash fund that is just producing a bit more in returns. It's easier now to take on a client because of what is available.
So it's made it more accessible, even more accessible, interest rates being where they are.
It's always been accessible. It's just the level of risk that people feel like they're taking. And when people move into, if you say to somebody, stock market, you can see it in their body language. They're like,
absolutely, stiffen up.
Yeah.
That sounds risky.
Yeah, what's the risk in that? How much could I lose? Not how much could I gain, how much could I lose?
Yes.
How much will I outweigh inflation through the equities? Well, you'll always outweigh inflation in some way, shape or form over the longer term, but it's risk. They don't want to do it.
There's a big mindset shift there.
It's a huge mindset, and it's all education and mindset and risk and, the big flashing lights. Like I said to you before, if there was a risk associated with going to a McDonald's, the way there's a risk in investing in equities.
It's just about proportionality.
Yeah, it is.
But just be proportionate.
Everybody wants to look at the negatives.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, as human beings, I think that's probably a natural...
Do you think that's human beings, or do you think that's as Brits?
Well, it's funny you say that. I was in the States a few weeks ago, and I think we are worse than they are at naturally seeing the risks and the cons rather than the pros. And that is, again, might be where I was. It might be incorrect, but more Americans I speak to seem optimistic about change and opportunity. And in the UK, we seem a little bit more conservative. Certainly speaking for myself.
I speak to a lot of Brits in America, and that whole land of opportunity, there is definitely more optimism or they seem to think there's more optimism. Things work better in America than they do in the UK. People do their jobs that they're meant to be doing. I have one client who is a huge stickler for this. You know, his local council, he'll ring them and say, I've got this problem, and within a few hours somebody will be there to fix it. People want to make money. People are happy to pay you a fee. And I found this, you know, in with Americans as expats, working with them. If you say to them, there's going to be a £5,000 fee associated with this, they don't bat an eyelid.
No.
They do not bat an eyelid.
Yeah.
Whereas in the UK, paying for a service, everybody seems to have an issue with paying for something. And yet that's what makes the world go round. You go and get your car serviced, that'll be £500. You what?
It's true.
You just had your car service. That's what it costs you. And then you've got some people, probably our parents or our dads anyway, that would probably look to find the cheapest, go and buy their own parts, have somebody come to the house, fix this. No insurance with that whatsoever.
Never works right.
Buy the wrong part, you don't get a refund on that part. Now you've gone in excess of 500 quid where you could have just paid them.
And then you got three people to go and complain to. yeah, you lost the warranty. You got to go to the spare parts company, and the engineer, the poor engineer that tried to fit the parts, is in
4
trouble.
different brands of tyres on your car. Yeah.
Are you been looking at my car?
And then we follow in their footsteps. No, it's. I think it is the case. We don't want to pay for the services. No. And if people are more open to, you know, people used to say to me, why do you pay someone to cut your grass? That's lazy. No, it's not. That's not lazy. That's an hour that would take me.
Yes.
And I paid him £7 to do that job. Keeps him in business. It frees an hour up for me to do my job, to go and charge for my services. In fact, the guy who cuts my grass, I might take him on as a client.
Yeah.
I might look at his pension for him while he's cutting my grass, and we're both getting paid.
There's definitely a difference between an abundance mindset and knowing that your money is there. Your effort that you've banked in the form of money is to be used to spend to make your future efforts even more valuable, whatever they choose to be. But again, that goes back to what I said. When you look at everything through the context of the money that you have earned, so much is lost. So much value is lost when all you're looking at is those coins. And, you know, money travels from low value to high, right? If I value something more than you, I will pay more for it.
Yeah.
And the moment we recognize that, you recognize money and the store of value, the store of effort is not a linear line. It's upwards.
Yeah.
Money will always go from low value to high to somebody that values that they value the money more than the item or the service they are giving you. And there are always opportunities up and down that scale to recognize. So we've covered off a heck of a lot, and it's been a lot of fun. And I've certainly learnt a lot myself on finance and your industry. We've covered off how so much of your industry was essentially built or propagated on big egos, and there are still a lot of big egos out there. We've talked about stocks and how those prices can be affected by those big personalities, but also how really the average investor doesn't need to worry quite so much unless they're deciding to go it alone and buy individual stocks. What would you say, though, is the pivotal thing that you potentially need to do, or your industry needs to do, to build up that trust and education? Because, you know, this is one podcast in a million. But as you said, when you walk through the doors of Sainsbury's, if it said, don't buy the chicken sticks because you eat 10 of them and you might die 10 years earlier, that's always in your face. And somewhere in our culture, with the Wolf of Wall Street and all of this crazy, Wall Street movies, penny shares, all of this stuff that we've got in our psyche to distrust, how does your sector go about winning that trust and making your job effectively easier?
I don't know if it's something that the sector needs to do, or whether it's something that needs to be brought in at a younger age for people to learn about. But education in schools needs to involve a bit more in life education. And I feel as though there's not enough being taught in schools about how much have you used Pythagoras' theorem in your professional life since you left school?
Every day.
Every day. Yeah. Everyone says that when I ask that question. However, and I've told this to many people. When I left school at the age of 16, I hit 18 and I got offered a credit card straight away with a £2,500 limit on it. I had no idea how it worked. I went and spent £2,500 on the credit card. In fact, I took it out of a cash machine not knowing what it would do. There was loads of small print, all the rest of it, uneducated. Until my mother saw a statement and then educated me on it. Too late then. 39% APRs on that, and the costs that are associated with taking cash out of a credit card, all the rest of it. It needs to start from a younger age. In terms of our industry, I think it's more the regulator needs to educate the general public to say, look, we have got these IFAs nailed down. There's no way around it. You need to trust them. They'll break down every penny of the cost. However, you need a pilot for a plane. Let them be the pilot to guide you to retirement.
Well, they give that badge when you invest your 85 grand in a bank, or however much. It says protected up to 85. So it's there and obvious, and no one thinks twice about putting their money in a bank account, despite all that stuff with Northern Rock all those years ago, whatever it was. That isn't quite so obvious in your sector.
No. And again, like we do so much of our work online as well, like Teams calls and stuff like that. It's so different, and people, financial advisory firms, we're no longer on high streets for people to walk in and see the financial advisor. It just doesn't happen like that.
So winning the trust, back to education, dispelling some of the myths.
Trust, but again, I think for what the regulator does, they should really sing about the fact that we report to them every 6 months with our person, and we don't hold any client money personally.
It's true.
The client is paying us a fee.
So, to summarise that whole piece, the FCA needs to be a bit more proud of what it does in this country and potentially put a bit of budget towards marketing so everybody in this country understands actually financial services are a good bet and they are safe and they're more regulated than anything else in this country.
Yeah, absolutely. And it will help drive more money into the economy, because if you put more money in your pension and save more money, that drives money into the UK economy, into all those businesses in the FTSE 100, 250, all the smaller AIM companies, stuff like that. You drive money into the economy through pensions, through savings, through ISAs, all of that.
And that's good for everyone that's invested.
Good for the whole economy. It drives money into the market.
Hamzah, thank you very much. It's been very entertaining and we hope to have you again soon.
Pleasure. Thank you, mate. Cheers. Appreciate that.